One death row inmate ordered a feast that cost the state $1,847.
A cheeseburger, an omelet, fried okra, 3 fajitas, ice cream, pound of barbecue, peanut butter fudge, how about a pizza, and then 3 root beers to wash it down, and he didn't touch any of it.
2 chicken fried steaks, a triple bacon cheeseburger, a meat lover's pizza, and 8 other dishes. It took an entire day to prepare. When they brought it to his cell, he looked at the massive spread that could feed a family of 8. He looked at the exhausted prison staff who had worked all day to fulfill his request. And then he said 4 words that changed everything. "I'm not hungry anymore." He refused to eat a single bite. Within 24 hours, Texas eliminated the last meal tradition that had existed for over 150 years.
So now, Texas will no longer offer death row inmates a special last meal.
One man's final act of cruelty destroyed a century-old symbol of human dignity. This is the story of how Lawrence Russell Brewer used his final meal to commit one last act of evil and change the American justice system forever. This is Lawrence Russell Brewer. On September 21, 2011, he was scheduled to die by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. But Brewer wasn't just any death row inmate. He was responsible for one of the most horrific hate crimes in American history. In 1998, Brewer and 2 accomplices chained James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old black man, to the back of a pickup truck and dragged him for 3 miles along a rural Texas road. The crime was so brutal it shocked even hardened investigators. The murder became a symbol of racial violence that led to federal hate crime legislation. Byrd's death sparked national conversations about racism and justice in America. Throughout his trial and 13 years on death row, Brewer showed no remorse for his crime. He laughed about it. He bragged about it. He said he'd do it again.
I could not believe, that this could happen. We got through it by the grace of God.
But on his final day, as guards prepared for his execution, Brewer wasn't thinking about his victim or his crimes. He was planning one final act of cruelty that would outlast his own life. The last meal tradition dates back centuries, rooted in the belief that offering a condemned person their final food choice was an act of basic human dignity. Even the worst criminals deserved this small mercy. Most requests were humble. Timothy McVeigh asked for 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Ted Bundy declined a special meal entirely. Those were simple human moments before the ultimate punishment. The meals were prepared with care by prison staff who understood they were participating in someone's final moments on Earth. It was considered a sacred duty, a last gesture of humanity. In Texas, the rules were surprisingly generous. Inmates could request almost anything as long as it could be prepared in the prison kitchen or purchased locally. There was no cost limit, no restriction on quantity. But Lawrence Russell Brewer saw this tradition differently. He didn't see compassion or dignity. He saw an opportunity for one final act of manipulation and cruelty. On the morning of his execution, Brewer submitted his final meal request. What he asked for wasn't just excessive, it was deliberately insulting to the system and the memory of his victim. 2 chicken fried steaks with gravy and sliced onions, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet with ground beef, a large bowl of fried okra, 1 pound of barbecued meat, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, ice cream, peanut butter fudge, and 3 root beers. The order required multiple trips to local restaurants and grocery stores. Prison staff worked for hours coordinating with outside vendors, calling in favors and arranging deliveries. The final cost came to $1,847, more than many families spend on groceries in a month. For one man's final meal, that could feed 8 people. When the meal was finally assembled, it covered an entire table. Multiple guards were needed to transport it to Brewer's cell. It was the most elaborate last meal in Texas history. At 4 p.m., just hours before his scheduled execution, guards arrived at Brewer's cell with his elaborate final meal. They'd worked all day to fulfill his request. Lawrence Russell Brewer looked at the massive spread of food. He looked at the exhausted prison staff who had bent over backward to honor his final wish. He looked at the nearly $2,000 worth of food laid out before him. And then he delivered the 4 words that would change everything. "I'm not hungry anymore." Brewer refused to eat a single bite. Not one forkful of steak, not one sip of root beer, nothing. The entire meal was thrown away while the man who ordered it prepared for his execution with apparent satisfaction. Word of Brewer's stunt spread quickly through the prison system. Officials were outraged. This wasn't just about money. It was about the deliberate mockery of a tradition meant to preserve human dignity. When the story broke, public reaction was swift and furious. Taxpayers were outraged that their money had been wasted on an elaborate meal for a convicted killer who showed no remorse. Texas State Senator John Whitmire said, "It's extremely inappropriate to give a person sentenced to death such a privilege. It's a privilege which the perpetrator did not provide to their victim." Within 24 hours of Brewer's execution, Texas prison officials announced a historic change. The last meal tradition, honored for over 150 years, was officially eliminated. From that day forward, condemned inmates would receive the same meal as other prisoners on their execution day. No special requests, no elaborate feasts, no final acts of manipulation. The decision sent shockwaves through the American prison system. Other states began reviewing their own last meal policies. Some imposed strict cost limits, others eliminated special requests entirely. James Byrd Jr.'s family supported the policy change. "Our father was denied his last meal," said one family member. "Why should his killer be given such consideration?" At 6:21 p.m. on September 21, 2011, Lawrence Russell Brewer was strapped to a gurney in the execution chamber. He had spent his final hours not eating the feast he demanded, but satisfied with the chaos he had created. When asked for final words, Brewer offered no apology to the Byrd family, watching from the witness room. Instead, he said, "As far as any regrets, no, I have no regrets. No, I do it all over again, to tell you the truth." The lethal injection began at 6:21 p.m. Brewer was pronounced dead at 6:21 p.m., becoming the fourth person executed in Texas that year. But his final act of defiance had accomplished something his crime never could. It had permanently changed the American justice system. Today, the last meal tradition exists in much more limited form across America. Most states impose strict cost limits between $20 and $40. Some states eliminated special requests entirely. In Texas, condemned inmates now receive the same meal as other prisoners, typically a standard institutional meal of meat, vegetables, and bread. The days of elaborate final feasts are over. Some argue that Brewer's stunt eliminated an important symbol of humanity in an otherwise harsh system. Others contend that the tradition had become a mockery that needed to end. What's undeniable is that Lawrence Russell Brewer's final meal, or rather his refusal to eat it, became his last act of cruelty. Even in death, he found a way to cause pain and eliminate a tradition that had provided comfort to countless condemned prisoners. Lawrence Russell Brewer's $1,847 meal that he never touched remains one of the most expensive and wasteful final requests in American history. The man who dragged James Byrd Jr. to his death had managed to drag down a 150-year-old tradition with him. But Brewer's story is just one of many shocking stories from death row. If you found this as unbelievable as we did, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Next time we dive into another chilling story from death row, exploring executions, grave doubts, and the haunting possibility that some of the condemned may have been innocent all along. Join our community demanding truth and accountability from the justice system, because sometimes the truth surfaces only after an innocent life has already been taken.